Welcome, everyone. My name is Stacy Massano, and I'm the Director of Business Development for Polunksy, Beitel Green in the Houston office.
And I'm Mimi Paxton, the Associate Director of Business Development for Polunksy, Beitel Green in the Dallas office.
And today we have Peter Idziak joining us, and he is an Associate Attorney with Polunksy, Beitel Green in our Dallas office. Every month, we put out a Mortgage Law Minute, which is great information on what's going on in the mortgage industry. Peter recently wrote our January Mortgage Law Minute on the recent amendments to the Texas home lending rules.
And Peter, we got a lot of great responses and questions about the article that you provided. Would you mind giving us an overview about the article you wrote?
Sure thing, Mimi. So late last year, Texas regulators introduced amendments and a new rule to the Texas Administrative Code concerning 50A6 home equity lending. There were four main areas that they addressed. The first, post-closing modifications. The issue arose as to whether the repayment schedule in the Constitution applies to that. The regulators said no, it did not. The second issue was whether a state of disaster declared by the governor was included in the state of emergency exception that allows a home equity loan to be closed sooner than 1 year after the previous home equity loan. The third area concerns, and very timely with COVID, where specifically at a proper closing location a loan can close. With COVID and social distancing, title companies were having to find alternative spaces at their locations to close loans. And finally, the commissions addressed the acknowledgement of fair market value. This must be signed by the lender and the owner. And there was some question as to whether the lender had to sign that on the closing date or whether it could be signed prior to closing. And the commissions clarified that, yes, it could be signed prior to or on the date of closing by the lender. So those were the four main areas that they addressed.
Great. So, Peter, we got several questions in, so we just wanted to ask you those. The first one is the new administration code rules clarify that a state of declaration declared by the governor falls under the state of emergency exception to the 1-year seasoning requirement. What was the purpose of adding this rule?
So, Stacy, the purpose for adding this rule is that back in last March, Governor Abbott declared a state of disaster under Chapter 408 of the Texas Government Code. The Texas Constitution states that the 1-year seasoning requirement can be waived by the borrower if the property is located in an area that has been declared in a state of emergency by either the president or the governor. So there was some question as to whether a state of disaster falls under that exception. The commissions clarified that, yes, a state of disaster declared by the governor does constitute a state of emergency. So there is the possibility of taking advantage of that waiver or exception to the 1-year seasoning requirement.
And are there any specific steps a lender must take in order to take advantage of the emergency exception to the 1-year seasoning requirement?
There is one major one. The borrower must request the earlier closing due to the state of emergency and must make that request on oath. On oath means that the borrower must execute an affidavit in front of a notary public. So an email or just a handwritten letter will not be sufficient. And that is something that needs to be done prior to closing the loan. It is a condition of closing it. So PBG does have a model affidavit that we can provide to our clients if they are in need of it. And there are two other issues that I just would add that lenders seeking to maybe take advantage of this should be aware of. That first, the state of emergency has to exist on the closing date. So it does behoove a lender to make sure that when they're closing the loan, that the state of emergency has not been lifted. The second issue concerns title insurance. One of the insuring provisions of the T42 is silent as to coverage when the loan is closing sooner than 1 year under the state of emergency. So some title companies have taken the position that they won't offer. It's insuring provision D of the T42 if the loan closes sooner than 1 year. Others will. So that is something to inquire with your title company about before closing loan, because if you are selling in the secondary market, you will need the full T42 coverage. And then the final point on that is that this exception to the 1-year requirement does not apply to home equity loans that are being converted via the F2 process into rate and term refinances. So if you're trying to do a rate and term refinance to take advantage of the lower rates, you can't use the state of emergency exception to waive the 1-year requirement. You'll have to wait the 1 year from the closing of the 50A6 to close that.
Wonderful. Thank you.
So one of the new rules, Peter, states that a lender may provide electronic copies of the final loan application and documents signed at closing in place of paper copies. Does this rule also allow a lender to provide the 12-day letter electronically?
So maybe the issue with this is that the rule that governs the provision of the final loan application and the loan document signed at closing is a separate rule from that which governs the provision of the 12-day letter. So with the rise of electronic closings, there's been some question as to whether lenders still had to provide physical copies of everything signed at closing when they were e-signed documents. So the commissions in this rule clarified that those documents can be provided electronically. This rule does not address the 12-day letter, so the commissions supported the idea that the 12-day letter can be provided electronically, but they did not amend the rule to address that because it's covered in a separate rule. And that is going to be possibly the subject of future clarification and rulemaking.
Wonderful. So Peter, the commissions amended the rules to state that a lender can sign the acknowledgement of fair market value either the day of closing or before. If the loan closes and the lender has not signed the acknowledgement, is the loan still in compliance with 50A6?
So Stacey, the answer to that question is no, but there is an easy cure for it. So the commissions amended the rule to clarify that the lender can sign the acknowledgement of fair market value either before or on the date of closing. The text of the Constitution is a little unclear as to whether the reference to the date of closing just applies to the value of the property or whether it applies to the requirement as to when it's signed. So the commissions clarified the lender can sign the acknowledgement of fair market value prior to or on the date of closing. If they don't, then, and the loan closes without the lender having signed it, there is a cure provision that allows the lender to cure this violation. So, and that is essentially to sign the acknowledgement of fair market value and provide a copy to the owner. So fairly simple cure procedure. But no, you cannot, as a lender, sign the acknowledgement of fair market value after closing and still be in compliance with that provision of 50A6.
Great, thank you.
Peter, this has all been so informative. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Oh, you're very welcome.
Yes, thank you, Peter. And for those of you that would like additional information, all of our information will be at the end of this video. If you'd like to subscribe to our Mortgage Law Minute, that information will be available at the end of this as well. Stay posted for more Mortgage Law Minute videos. And thank you, everyone. Have a great day.
Bye.